spirit of at least the four Gospels and the spirit of Jesus of Nazareth is not about conversion. It's a spirit of equal treatment, of the knowledge, acknowledgement of equal responsibility for one another. And it is trying to build a relationship that will help a Mary Magdalene in the New Testament, in the four Gospels, who is harassed as a woman. And you can use your imagination how that happened. I have my own stories that I've used in sermons and teaching across the years. She's harassed, and Jesus helps through his relationship with her, through his face-to-face encounter, to help her claim her life and her journey on her own terms. The scripture says that she was saved from demons by Jesus. And I submit that that was not probably some kind of immediate act, as it was a relational act that allowed Mary Magdalene space to face her life and to see her options and to choose life. So it's face-to-face is not a process of demanding you become like me. Who wants to be like me? So get that out of the way from the first. But what about the possibilities that you can become like the Creator, the life that has created you, or the best ideals that your own family has embedded in you? So what about that? Or what about the notion that you can be healed? So people who are afflicted, for an example, with sexism can be healed. So create a face-to-face for the purpose of helping them to reclaim their own responsibility to heal themselves. So I'll give you just one example of it that worked locally. I did basic training in the 70s with Local 11 of the HER Union in Los Angeles at the call of Maria Elena de Rosso, who is now the Secretary-Treasurer of the Labor Council in LA. And so I did basic work, nonviolent training, organizing, philosophy, and so forth with that union. And then I got, after that, and I've started this relationship, then I got a call saying that the police are hostile and they give us a very hard time on the streets when we're doing picketing or organizing. So we did another set of workshops for about 60 organizers with the police. And what my thesis was that you work on the police face-to-face encounters. You help the police officer to share his or her life with you. And you help them to understand what you are about. And so, above all, you try in that face-to-face encounter to allow the policeman to become better than a police officer, but to become a fellow human being who has responsibilities on the street that you have as well. And so that worked rather magnificently. So face-to-face encounter as a tactic for each person, I'm saying, is a critical way in which nonviolence calls us. So then, the sort of last thing that nonviolence does is to suggest to us that you take that power of nonviolent persuasion and you organize it in protracted campaigns. So let me try to outline very quickly what that looks like. Gandhi has produced an 11-point methodology, or what I used to call in the 60s an 11-point approach to creating change and movement. And I've organized those into 4 points, 4 steps that are interconnected, so cannot be done as 4 different levels, but sometimes will all be going on at the same time. The first level, I say, is focus. Now, a part of focus is an assessment, or what Gandhi would have called investigation. Gandhi thought that he, as an activist and a nonviolent practitioner, needed to know as much as he could discover about every issue with which he was confronted. So reading and studying and talking to people and learning from people was a critical way in which Gandhi worked. So I wonder, for an example, in the fears that our Islamic community here in Orange County faces, if there has been an investigation, an assessment. Now I know that you may have some community agencies that look at each incident, but let me tell you what I mean by an assessment. In preparing for the Nashville movement, a group of 30 to 50 people in Nashville sat down every Saturday morning for 6 months and did an assessment of what the Negro faced in Nashville in terms of repressive limits and shackles. We spent 6 months every Saturday morning talking about every conceivable thing. We had no kind of agenda. Those who came, who happened to be clergy, who happened to be business people, who happened to be medical people, teachers, all sorts of people, simply, we had no one governing us, and I chaired any number of those discussions, but the idea was just simply do a kind of a exhaustive statement on what we think Negroes in Nashville faced as barriers to their lives or as handicaps. That's what we did. And part of the purpose for doing that was this: focus in order to come to a decision. And that decision was, we will desegregate downtown Nashville. Now, this film doesn't say that, as I recall very well. To desegregate downtown Nashville. And you heard in the film what that might have been like. So that group of 40 to 50 people made the decision. Those meetings were sponsored by the Nashville Christian Leadership Council. We were convinced that nonviolent struggle could make a difference. Montgomery bus boycott proved it, showed it, demonstrated it. And our question, as was Martin King's question in those days, 59, 58, 59, was, what's the next step? How can we do it again? And that was our question in Nashville. And so we made that assessment and made the determination what our target was going to be. So if fear in the Muslim community is a major major issue, and I think it is, then perhaps the beginning point is to take this first step of nonviolence and really do a community assessment of what that is. What it feels like, what it looks like, where it comes from, and all the rest of it. Anything else that you yourselves determine. In order to try to shape whether or not there can be a protracted struggle to end it. Now, a part of what I described in this emergence of a nonviolent dimension of the civil rights movement was, in fact, a massive effort to break the fear of segregation and racism in our respective places. That was a major part of it. We actually had a campaign in 1966 called the Mississippi March Against Fear. Mississippi was a state of tyranny. Some academics have written books about it called the closed society. The state And the citizens organized, the white citizens organized. If a white person thought that Jim Crow law was wrong, that person could be driven out of the state. They made it a picture to see to it no one in the state would challenge in any way the life of the state as a state of segregation and racism and fear and impoverishment. I have a good friend now who may be in hospice in Nashville, who was the YMCA minister at the University of Mississippi. And Will was a man born in Mississippi, one of my solid friends. But Will was driven out of the University of Mississippi in 57 or 58 simply because he did not treat black folk on campus the way Mississippi thought black people should be treated. And he did not think that the closed society was an adequate expression of Christianity. So it marked him, and he was soon marked and had to go on his way. As many as 300 white ministers a year were being driven out of their pulpits in Mississippi in the 1960s. And not because they became flaming desegregationists, but simply because they thought there was something about being a person who treated people with dignity and hospitality. The slightest thing. I had an incident in Memphis, in 1968, when a white minister of one of the large prestigious congregations in Memphis was driven out of the pulpit because he had a friendship with me. Now, he really didn't. We just happened to meet from time to time and shake hands and treat each other with equanimity, and we were part of the Memphis Ministers Association. And so just that fact was enough to call the deacons of a large congregation to work. And one day he woke up and the parsonage doors were locked and his church offices and the church buildings were locked, and he had no keys. They just changed the locks on everything and said, "You're out." So, beg pardon?
Who did it?
Huh? The deacons.
Not the police.
Huh?
Not the police.
No, not the police. No, the deacons did it. And that did happen. I had that happen to other friends in Mississippi also, where the church locks were changed one day when they had no keys and they were told to leave. Just like that. All right, so the next step then has to be assessment to determine what our situation is. Then in this assessment, you draw up a plan for action, a strategy that should be short-term and long-term. Should be long-term, short-term. You should draw up a list of actions that can be used in a sequence if necessary. The second stage in my 4 points is negotiations. Is there any chance that a Protestant congregation or a Catholic parish that is anti-Islamic could be persuaded to select some people from their congregation to sit for a period of time with a handful of people from the Islamic community simply to have a conversation in some space that can be secure and safe? Would they do it? We were approached in Memphis, Tennessee at Centenary Church, where I was a pastor, in the height of the sanitation strike in '68 by lay people out of other largely white congregations who said, we'd like to talk. So Centenary United Methodist Church agreed to do a little program where they pulled in some of their people, handful of people, where we pulled in a handful of people who would be prepared to sit and talk with any delegation from any other white church, any white church. We only made a couple of rules. One was that we want you to hear what we think the situation is in Memphis first, before you ask questions and comments. And that started a process that did happen in Memphis, and that eventually in Memphis Centenary Church and Madison Avenue United Methodist Church began a monthly program that resulted in a major period of change in the lives of both congregations. So, if that's possible, so some kind of negotiations can be the second step. Negotiation is not always an essential part of the process of organizing. We did not negotiate first in Nashville or in Memphis or in Birmingham. No, in Birmingham we did. But in any number of campaigns we did not negotiate first. We negotiated after the demonstrations had begun. Then the third step is the direct action campaign. That's the third, again, a summary of the way in which Gandhi presented his methodology. Direct action campaign. Now, while that's going on, the methodology of 1 and 2 will continue to go on, because you want to escalate. You want to continue to train people, teach people, attract people to be active and actively engaged. And then the fourth step is what I call the follow-up. Gandhi said, "Don't let the press tell your story. You tell your own story." Now, a lot of activist groups don't understand that because a lot of times we call press conferences right away instead of writing our own story. And now there are, of course, there's technology available so that no local group has to call a press conference and tell the press. They can begin the process of announcing their message and work on their own. So that's an important point to remember. But the follow-up is that you run the campaign for effective change, and then you follow up to see to it it's done. And then you also follow up to evaluate how you have proceeded so far, to look at the weaknesses, to strengthen the action, and then you take the next step that is necessary, recognizing that we are confronted with issues that will not change overnight. They will not be abolished overnight. Many of these issues in the United States began with us in 1609 or in 1523, whatever dates you want to use, founding of the country and the settlements. But, and in many ways, past generations on these shores worked from the angle of the conquest of the land before they thought they could settle the land, although these things went hand in hand very often. So they were less concerned about what happened to the Indian. We made a lot of mistakes along the way, and we don't like to talk about these things, but we'd better learn to talk about them. We hung women in England as witches. That's part of the foundation for the severe sexism that you hear in the media today, even. One of my heroines in American life is Mary Dyer, who was hung in 1659 in the Boston Commons because she was a Quaker who refused to stay away from the colony of Massachusetts. She's one of the unknown figures who helped to establish the notion of the freedom of worship and religion in the United States. So we have that kind of a basis in our history that our previous generations are not always faced. Although always there have been some in every previous generation here in these shores who've wanted to stress and push and expand equality, liberty, justice for all, and wanted to have what some of our people 110 years ago called the beloved community, that I taught as being a way of talking about God's will on earth, God's will in earth, how we do God's will, the beloved community. So now those are ways of looking at this. So this is a 4-point methodology that comes directly from Gandhi on how you organize a campaign. And I would push hard for the notion that we need in our country protracted campaigns if we're going to do the work that is before us and that we need to understand. And I would suggest to you that if you have not read about the nonviolent movement in America in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, go back and look at it. Most of them have not been researched yet. The sit-in campaign hasn't really been researched yet. There have been some books, but no comprehensive book on it. But, for example, I see these folk here who look as though they might be students in a university. In 1968, students, first at Howard University in Washington, D.C., then at Columbia University in New York, did major sit-ins and nonviolent demonstrations on their campuses to get faculty and presidents and administrators to take a look at their university and recognize that they said, the students, we do not have all the kinds of courses we need in order to live in the 20th century in the world. We need other kinds of curriculum. So a direct result of that movement that went on for maybe 20 years after that, came straight across the country, never been examined. I don't think a single book on that movement has been done. After campus after campus. Part of the result of that effort is that we now have